if there's a system in place, whether I believe it or not, and I learn how to operate that system, then I can get a better outcome.
Spirituality and capitalism belong together. Those thoughts, those feelings, that comes from something bigger than I am. And together I believe we can all grow. That's how we're going to change the world. That's how we're going to change the planet.
All right. Well, thank you for coming in today, Greg. I really appreciate you joining us here at the Spiritual Capitalist. And just so you guys know, I have Greg Anderson here. And Greg has been a friend of mine for at least a decade now. And I just really wanted to have him come on because he's doing some really amazing projects at this point in time. But really why I want to have him come on, it's a little bit of a selfish reason, is because we both love to talk about spirituality and capitalism and this whole gamut of things. And one of the things I love about you is that you have walked the fire. And what I mean by that is I watched you, and we can get into this a little bit, but you've gone through some pretty big, I would say you've overcome a lot of obstacles. You've had a lot of trials. And the way I've watched you walk through those trials and those obstacles has been with class, has been with honor, has been with dignity, has been with respect, never throwing anybody under the bus, writing books about it, even with your marriages and your breakups, and you've been very public about these things. And so I've been able to watch you, and just to give you a little background, when I met Greg originally, I wasn't the biggest fan of Greg, just facts. And I thought about this today, actually. I was like, man, I'm gonna have Greg come on. I really wanna just be real and raw. And I thought, why wasn't I, right? And I thought, okay, what was it inside of me, right? What was the reflection side of me that I didn't like the guy. I was like, well, he's kind of cocky, and he was like this. And I thought, whoa, maybe then that meant I was cocky and like this, and like maybe we're nailing against each other, and who's got the bigger wallet in the room, and all these different things that people do. But even with all that being said, I've always found something very uniquely interesting about you. And I feel like we've been on the same path in many different ways, watching each other go back and forth and contacting you through social media and be like, hey, Greg, like, what's going on? Like, how are you? Where are you out in the world? How are you feeling right now? Holy shit, I can't believe what you just went through. So I appreciate you coming on here and kind of, as they say in the LDS Church, bearing your testimony.
Amazing. I appreciate you being on here. You brought back a lot of memories. Back in the day, we were both in internet marketing.
Yeah.
And at that moment in time, you were a little more on the ad side. I was a little bit more on receiving the traffic, right?
Yeah.
I was a little bit more of the offer person.
And you were developing the platforms too.
I was developing the platform that we were operating off of.
Incredible platform.
We crushed for years because we organized and created and architected like the best systems. It's also what got me in trouble a little bit later. We'll hit on that in a little bit.
Right.
But as we get into this conversation, this business and spirituality, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
How does a banana become a human?
How does a banana become a human? Not that I'm aware of. I mean, there's different dimensions apparently, but not that.
Perfect.
My mind goes to some like, okay, let me think, like on a very metaphysical area, and like, okay, if we have DNA and, atoms and molecules, but let's face it, that's like saying, how does a dog become a human,
Yeah.
An inanimate object.
It's an interesting question because of part of what I love to talk about is processes and systems and learning how things work, including parts of the universe and parts of our body, so that we are better stewards. We're able to operate in a cleaner way, right? You just have to know that there's systems in place, whether you see that they exist or not. So
Right.
The banana.
Got it.
If I have a banana in my hand and I tear a part of it and I take a bite of it, the salivic system, the system in my body, starts to break that down, right? It's a system that works every time you put something in your mouth. You swallow it, it goes into your stomach, it breaks it down through the stomach acid, and then from the top of that intestinal tract, it starts to cannibalize. It goes, what's in the stomach? And let me tear it apart to its lowest common denominator. This is just part of the intestinal tract. Then it gets to the lower intestines and it goes, cool, what are the nutrients that are in here? And the cells go, oh my gosh, there's nutrients in this. So it grabs it and it becomes a cell. So that physical banana turned through our body process into a human. Every piece of thing that you've ever eaten. But here's what's crazy, is how does a donut become a human?
Well, I think it just turns into sugar.
But this is through the same process.
Yeah.
right? You eat it, it goes down, and you digest it, and then your body goes, oh, there's a nutrient here, let's make this. But the outcome is completely different for the cell, whether I eat the banana or the donut. But the system works exactly the same way. So as we kind of like dive into these kind of conversations and the tearing down and things getting really difficult and walking through this process, what I was learning how to do was operate the systems in my body and in my world where I got to control what the outcome was because I knew the process. It's an example like every human on the planet is born, we're blank. We have all the cellular structure, right, that works and it grows whether we agree to it or not. But how a human is trained is by all the words, the society, the community, its food, its churches, like everything is programmed. And so part of this process was going, okay, cool. If there's a system in place, whether I believe it or not, and I learn how to operate that system, then I can get a better outcome. So for me, it's always about, when we talk about systems and softwares and even the human, everything operates in a specific way, and you just learn how to tap it.
Yeah, I've seen you. I would consider you a tactician. Like the way that you look at every little tiny thing, even just to give people at home that are listening to this or watching this, when you were creating systems, to make things easy, and you would figure out all these back end processes. This is well before it was easy just to build a website or to do some of the basic programming that you can do now. I mean, there was so much going on in the background to just even get that thing to run. So you have to be able to think like you think.
Yeah.
And I find that interesting about people in general, like the way that we think, the way that we feel, the way that we do things, it really becomes this reflection, or as you would say, kind of more part of you, right? Part of the, like the banana in your inner and outer world, right?
Right.
So when you got to that point in time, so when I met you, that was probably what, maybe 20 years ago, I would bet you about that.
Yeah, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Yeah, about 20-something years ago.
Yep.
And at that time, you were running your mortgage company. You had built those softwares. You were working hard. You were married. And I'm sure you were under immense amount of pressure, right? Now, looking at it from the perspective of like, okay, I'm no longer a sales guy or a marketer. Now I'm the guy running the business. I got employees. I'm doing those things, which I know that position now.
Yeah.
And so first and foremost, I apologize for judging you because I realized I was judging myself at the same time, right? And that's the beauty of all this stuff, this evolution of things. But how did you kind of get there? And then, I really want to break into what started to happen, and very briefly, right? So how you got there, where you ended up at, and then I want to really dive into some more of the spiritual journeys that you have been on in the last 10, 15 years.
Sure. So part of my upbringing, so we're talking about how a human gets programmed, right? I grew up in what you just call a broke family. Broke emotionally, physically, financially. Parents were divorced young, food stamps growing up, that type of a thing. I was raised here in Utah, down in Utah County, where it used to be operated by a steel mill. That was the majority of people that had high-paying jobs. So whenever we go out of business, money would just dry up. And so I look at it and go, how did I learn what I thought success was? And it was MTV and James Bond. So as I'm going through my teens, and then I'm into my 20s, and I'm starting to get through my mid-20s going, how come I don't understand these things? All of that programming was, well, you need to make a lot of money, and you have to have a hot wife. Well, so then I started making a lot of money, and I had a hot wife, and I wasn't happy. And that led to divorce and me going, okay, well, that's not right. What is it in me? Because now I'm going like, I've made money, I've lost money, I've made money, I've lost money, I've been divorced, I've been married, I've been divorced, been married. I'm like, there's something I just don't understand about this life. And it was probably around the same time that we met. So I was living into that reality. I was living into money. I had a 17-person Range Rover limo back then, which became the best nightclub in town because honestly, as I look back now, I just didn't really like myself. And I didn't know it.
Yeah.
I was just filling, right? With all the drugs and alcohol and just partying and spending money because that's just how I thought I would need to show up for the world in order to be loved.
Yeah, and I think that's most people, like, at least from what I can tell, right? Most people that are close to our age, raised with the MTV generation, raised with, family that come from the same area, family not doing too well financially, there's not really a whole lot of how do you do this whole thing. but you know you want that thing because it looked really great on MTV, right? And
Yeah.
you're like, man, if I can have this thing, these places inside of myself that are hurt, wounded, broken, unloved, or unlovable, maybe someone will care, someone will love me, but you don't see it that way
Right.
until you do a lot of work to be like, oh man,
Right.
I just didn't love myself.
It was that process. It was getting to that point. And around this, it was probably 2013 at that point where I had been very religious and then not religious, and then going, okay, there's just more to life that I don't understand. I called a friend and said, hey, will you teach me how to meditate? Because he was teaching these types of things in his business. And he said, no, go read a book. And a week later, maybe 2 weeks, he called me back and said, hey, I have this idea for a men's only personal development company, and meditation is going to be a part of it. Would you like to be part of the founding company? And that's what Wake Up Warrior with Garrett J. White ended up becoming.
Okay.
It's back in its inception. So I picked up this meditation practice and I fought it for 3 years. Like I learned how to like be really in a masculine sense. I learned how to walk through a brick wall. I learned how to, if I was feeling, say, depressed, I learned that all I had to do was eat a certain way and work out every morning. And that helped me move a lot of that energy through my body.
Right.
But it still wasn't like a wholeness. And so at one point in time, I decided, well, it's not masculine thing. I mean, obviously I was probably a little toxic, but you know,
Sure.
we go through that process. Hopefully now our youth doesn't have to, but we were bridging, you know, boomers and older generations until now.
Wartime.
Yeah.
Like you're with those boomers. I mean, the way that they raised us, you know, drinking out of a hose and
Yeah.
all the other things. And we also raise each other, I think, a lot of time
Yeah.
as kids, right?
Yeah.
And you get a bunch of teenage boys together, it can be rowdy as hell. So,
Yeah.
and I mean, you know.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. So you worked for 3 years meditating. You know, there's a lot of people tell me all the time before we jump into this,
Yep.
Greg, I don't even know how to meditate. Like
Yeah.
I can't sit there and close my eyes and just things be quiet. My brain's going all the time, my monkey mind. Like what would you tell people to that?
Yeah. It's a great concept because the first off is just dispelling what meditation is. Because if I tell you I'm going to go exercise today, I've never exercised. It's a container word.
Mm-hmm.
I lifted weights. I ran. I did cardio. I did Pilates, right? Exercise is just a container of
Right.
anything that you want to fill into it. Walking, running, swimming, it doesn't really matter. So meditation is the same thing. Meditation is just a container. The modality that you use, the way that you use is almost like exercise. Like if I want to feel relaxed and I want to close my eyes and be guided, then there's a process for that. If I want to learn mental strength so that the monkey mind doesn't jump around, there's a practice for that. So at the very base of it is just to understand there's never a wrong. It's the same as learning how to exercise at the gym. It's what works best for what you're trying to go through.
Makes sense. Makes
Yeah.
sense. So going back to then, so you spent the 3 years,
Yep.
right? You were working with Wake Up Warrior.
Yep.
And helping them out. And just tell me what happens after that.
I actually hired some feminine female coaches, women that taught women to be in their feminine. And I hired them because I'm like, there's just something I don't understand about love. Like, I know how to be like strong. What I didn't know is fierce, like the ferocity of like, you imagine like a lioness protecting her cubs,
Oh yeah.
like decimate all. I knew how to love, but I didn't really know how to do that. So that led me another 3 years of working with female coaches, helping me understand emotions and how to process that. And that led me into different styles of meditation. That led me staying with the Damanhurian in Italy, learning their components, Colombia for ayahuasca. It was kind of this experience where I felt like I was just tipping my baby toe in a little bit more and a little bit more, just learning a little bit more about myself until I started hitting that tipping zone of going like, wow, there's something else, and I'm going to have to go hard if I want to learn this.
Yeah, you were telling me earlier, we were talking about ayahuasca, right?
Yeah.
And I've talked about ayahuasca many times.
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of it, right? But I'm also not a big fan of what I consider chasing medicine.
Right.
I'm not a big fan of just continuing to do medicine. And what I mean by that is mushrooms and psychedelics and whatever that thing is, and keep doing it like there's something that we're trying to find or we're lost or we can't find it without it.
Right.
And you went through something very similar because so you run into some legal issues, right? Which then a lot of stuff kind of falls apart and you have to rebuild. But you told me you kind of went down to Mexico. Will you get into that just a little bit with me?
Yeah. So in the midst of all of this, Colombia happens. I'm with you too. There, anything that you take is a drug or a medicine, and if I could speak, it depends on your intention.
Right.
You can, I know a lot of people that have done things hundreds and hundreds of times, and it's like, why? Like, what was the intention behind it? Because at that point, it's just a good time.
Oh yeah, there's a difference between taking mushrooms. When I was a kid, I took mushrooms.
Yeah.
Versus taking with an intention to do shadow work or to find out like, okay, what is inside of me, or teach me something, or I'm here as a vessel to learn.
Yep.
Versus I want to see some shit.
So hopping back into it, I'm going through all these experiences and I'm learning the shadow work is like accepting that part of you and then letting go what was, right? I really love, Sid Guru talks about this term in his book, Inner Engineering, which is the root word of responsibility means response able. Am I able to respond today? Not am I responsible for what was, but can I show up and respond today? So I'm learning this going, oh, wow, what in my life isn't me or wasn't mine? And I'm walking in my bedroom one day and I bump into my rack of like t-shirts and I touch a shirt and I said, what do you remind me of? And I saw an image of a concert with a girl like 6 years previous. I'm like, wow, I walk by this shirt 3 times a day. I wonder how many times my subconscious mind is picking up that cue. So I just went through my closet and was just like touching everything. What do you remind me of? And I got rid of most things. And I walk into my living room. I'm like, wow, I haven't picked any of this. It was either done for me, like an ex, or it was an interior designer. I'm like, nothing in my house is me. And I look in my garage and I've got the limo and the Ferrari and I got 2 extra range. I'm like, what? Why do I have these? And it was because that's what I thought I needed to be loved. So I'm like, okay, something's changing. And around that same time, as I'm like getting rid of things, I got a call. And one of my businesses, the business that we spoke about before, I ran what I would call a 95%, 5% life. 95% I felt great about. 5% was like, meh, maybe. But the 95 was great. Like, people talk and they're like, if you're over 80, if you feel, better than 80%, then you're doing good. And that 5% ended up costing me a lot of money. And it cost me that company. I got investigated by the FTC for a year and was going through all kinds of books and just conversations. And it was done because there's 20 lines of text on one of my sales pages that just wasn't accurate. And when I sat down with them in my depositions and they're like, hey, why is this here? I'm like, well, I put it there. They're like, do you know that this isn't accurate? I say, I do. I'm like, oh, okay, thanks for telling me the truth. And then we worked through the rest of the situation. But this was happening at the same time I was getting rid of things. And I started having these dreams from a book that I was reading called The Journey of Souls, which I really love.
Oh, yeah.
And I did a past life regression. And I kept seeing these pyramids in Mexico. And I'm like, well, I'm getting rid of everything. I'm being investigated. So why don't I just go to Mexico? And just see. Let me just see. I was going to go for a month.
Yeah, and just to be clear, you're not going to Mexico because you're trying to avoid anything
No,
or whatever.
No.
You're literally going because you're on this. You're on your, like, I would say kind of the alchemist way. You're in this point in time of your spiritual journey, this awakening where you're listening to your heart more than you're listening to your pocketbooks and your past and these things, and you're being guided.
100%.
By what? What are you being guided by?
You nailed it, because I was looking at this process, like, how do I go nomadic for a little while? How do I like clear all of the past entanglements out of me so I can just learn how to be me? And at the same time, this other situation happened, which was kind of like a little kick out the door. Like, hey, you're on the right path. Just go learn. Like, you're going to be in and out, and you're going to, provide all this documentation and see, what you did. And the end result was great. Like, there was a small fee that was paid, and it was great.
Right.
It wasn't a big deal. I just bring that up because it was like a traumatic way. I think all around everybody, all the time, the universe is like, hey, are you going to pay attention to that one thing? And if you don't, it keeps coming and it keeps coming. And my whole life was a 95% 5. I felt really good about 95% of all of it. And what I was learning is that's not good enough to be 5% uncomfortable. You have to be 100%. So I was at that moment in time, like, I'm meditating a lot, I'm channeling a lot, I'm like feeling into source. I'm like, what's my next intention? What's the next thing? Where can I grow? And I felt like my whole life was designed to tell me how to act, how to think, how to look. And it was the first opportunity where I'm like, okay, great. I have the resources to go. I still need to work. I still have family. I still have to take care of things. And let me just go. And I ended up leaving, and I was there for about a month. I'm back in Southern California, traveling in and out. And a friend of mine introduces me to a woman. Her name was Grandma G. She passed a couple years ago. And in the 70s and 80s, if you had cancer and you were a Saudi prince, you would fly in Grandma G. And she was the one that would work with tumors inside the body. Super powerful. And I'm in her living room, and I'm going to leave after a great conversation. She said, son, can I get your phone number? Can I call you when you get back into Mexico? And I said, yeah, sure. So I get back and we have a conversation. She goes, look, there's something that you've been trying to work on for a while, and I'd like to help you. We're going to create a lot of space in the head. But in order to do this, you need to learn what it's like to just be you. I'm like, great, this is fantastic. I'm on this journey anyway.
Right.
She goes, but before I tell you this, it's going to take you years to do it, and you need to make 3 commitments to me. I'm like, that's fine. I can do anything. I'm in my 40s. I'm successful. You know, great. I'm like, what are they? She says, number 1, you can't cut your hair for 3 years. I'm like, okay, is there any purpose to that? She goes, well, trees grew their roots in the ground to connect with everything around you. Humans grow their roots to the top of their hair to connect them around you. And if you look at the old religions that are still active, they don't cut their kids' hair until after they're at least 5 years old. And I go, well, I've always been clean cut, told what to look like. Why don't I go a little wild? So I said,
Saw
okay.
photos.
Yeah. The second one was no drugs, no alcohol, no food with antibiotics in it, no food with hormones in it. Your body is going to learn what it's like, or just to have nothing in it. That meant no plant medicine, no nothing. And then the third was no sex of any kind, not self, not with another person. You're going to learn what it's like to have all of the hormones and misfirings happening, because you're always in these situations where chemical reactions are happening in our body because of the way that we think. It's always learning how to unwind those processes. Did a lot of really deep spiritual work down there. Did a lot of clearing for old, pyramid structures and just a lot of great pieces. But for me, that lead and that guide was just learning that the more that I forgot, the more that I learned. And that meant by the more that I forgot about who everybody else told me to be, the more I remembered who I was.
And then who did you remember who you are?
That's a great question. Who I learned I am is Greg, and I'm responsible. And I'm responsible in this moment to just do the very best thing that I can in this moment, and I leave everything else out. It's not society that tells me to look this way. It's not society that tells me what softwares or companies to build or about money. It's not a federal government. It's not anybody. It's just me doing the very best I can today to solve problems, like actual real problems that we're in.
Right. I respect that.
Yeah.
I respect that so she tells you this,
Yeah.
and you obviously go on this journey.
I did. At first I was like, yeah, this is going to be really nice. Like, I'm not dating anybody. This is going to be fine. And I still dated while I was through there. I was just really open. I was like, hey, no sex. And then, are you sure? You get that thing. It's almost
Sure.
like a challenge. And the
Right.
girl is like, oh yeah, I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm like, sweetheart, I don't want to hurt your feelings.
Right.
But when I'm resolute, I'm resolute. And I lived about 2 miles outside of Tulum. Had a small studio out there. And I would open a map, Google Maps or whatever, and look at like old pyramid complexes. And Source would just drive me and say, you're going there. And I would take a rental car. I would drive out to that place. I would meet a family or somebody in particular there, meditate on their pyramids. I'd study with them. Sometimes I would live with them for a little while and learn what it was like. Because this was all like Mayan teachings, and the Mayans lasted for a lot longer than the United States is standing. So I wanted to know, like, what is the government structures like? What was the spiritual structures like? And with such a vast piece of property with people without cell phones, how did you stay connected? And what did you do? And so it was a lot of those like practical teachings that were just taught from like, lip to ear throughout the generations, and was just learning. And one of the most difficult parts that I had there is every time I tried to learn Spanish really well, I was just stopped. Like I had no brain thought around it. And what ended up coming to be, because at this point I'm learning this specific style of meditation. My last year down there, I was doing 14 hours a day of this one modality. What I was learning how to do is learn people without speaking. Because the English language has so many filler words. If we lived in Africa and in specific tribes, they speak click. So how many words do we say that really don't mean anything? Or how many spells are we putting out there maliciously, or try to get something from somebody? And so I was learning just how to be quiet and communicate with people as much as I could.
It's fascinating you say that. I ended up living in Barcelona. And when I lived in Barcelona, I could not for the life of me learn Spanish, like at all.
Yeah.
Everybody wanted to talk, would speak English to me somewhat. But for the most part, and so you'll know exactly what I'm going to talk about here, when I would sit by a church, or I would sit in a square or whatever, I couldn't understand anything. And what became a really interesting moment is when I would get on the trains and I would hear Americans. And I'd be like, I'd roll my eyes, like as if I was better than them on some level. I don't know why, but I was so used to the peace and watching people and coming with my own stories, my own narratives. And I realized how powerful my mind was as I was creating these stories and narratives about people that I knew nothing about. Or I would know them from when I would talk back and forth, and I would think things that were not true at all on any level. And I'd be like, oh, how is it showing up in my life in other places? And how's it showing up inside of myself, right? Those questions that we ask kind of that do that.
Yeah.
So when you say you couldn't learn Spanish, I'm like, oh, I can relate to that. But it becomes a really beautiful thing because you're able to take a lot more, at least I was, you're able to observe a lot more things. And there's almost a peace in the noise of language, or in the vibration of the tone of a human voice.
Yeah. One of the coolest expressions, one of the coolest things that I was learning, because I'm learning this form of meditation, which is this form of like specific style of energy work. And what I got to do is sit with people and just be quiet and say, okay, what is showing up in my body because of what they're going through? How do I feel because of what they're going? So I went internal to understand what somebody else was feeling, because I could just feel it in my body. I'm like, oh man, this is this kind of a problem or this type of a thing. So part of the silencing my mind from all of the chatter, but was also to be able to sit with somebody and understand through that empathetic process about what's happening in the body. So I might get a call now from somebody who's like, hey, I'm going through this problem. And I literally close my eyes. I'm like, okay, where's this showing up in my body? And then I can help and support them because of whatever's going on.
Do you find that you've always had that ability? Have you always been a deep feeler, or would you say that you primarily operated from the mind?
I think growing up was a deep feeler, and then there were all kinds of things that were shunned about that, right?
Oh yeah.
And so you shut those parts off, and then it comes out in not so healthy ways, emotional outbreaks or whatever that conversation is. And there's a great story of this. My daughter at the time, throughout the mix of this, and this is a story with her, she's about 8 years old. And, every night tuck her in, kind of lay and, cuddle with her and tickle her back or something. And this is prior to leaving, right? But she had a moment where she was having a really difficult time with some of her friends. Friends are going through a really hard time and she's crying about it. And I asked her, I said, sweetheart, do you know the difference in your body between your feelings and somebody else's? And she said, no. I said, okay, so let's pause for a minute and take a breath and ask your body, what are you feeling right now? And is it yours or somebody else's? And in that moment, I felt her like melt, because she just learned the experience of separating the difference of somebody who's empathic or telepathic, whatever you want to say. So many different psychic abilities, but she learned that, and she's been able to keep that. And that's the biggest way I could explain it to somebody, is learning that difference between you and them.
What a powerful gift to give to your daughter. And that's something that I think people that are listening to this and watching this can say, okay, when I'm feeling something, is this mine or is it somebody else's? Because we're tribal, because we're a community, because we are all connected.
Yeah.
Because of that, to be able to say, okay, is this my energy or is this someone else's energy? A lot of times, like the work you were doing this generational clearing of these pyramids and some of these really terrible massacres that were happening at that point in time, and dealing with a lot of the Mayan lineage. That's some really powerful work. I did one time like a ceremony in a fire where they put a bunch of candles in there, and it was from each side. It was with Don Miguel Luis. It did the Four Agreements, like that.
Yep.
You know, that type of work. It was in New Mexico, and I watched a lot of the ways that these ceremonies were done with such reverence and such, you know, care for the land, and the way that the Mayans thought. There's a lot of stuff that we can learn from that culture. What was some of the biggest things that you took away from that culture that you've been able to bring back and actually implement?
Yeah.
There's a difference between saying, oh, I have this knowledge versus I have this experience that I get to share with the world.
Yeah, there were two main parts that have been pretty transformative. And the first one was I'm going through these areas where that we would look at it from American eyes and say, that's really poor. You know, no indoor plumbing, no water, plywood shacks, right? And the first part of the brain goes, hey, I wonder how I can help. And I had a friend here from the US call, and he said, look, we're doing these tiny home things, and I think I can get everybody to donate a tiny home that buys a tiny home. It's like, man, that sounds like a great idea, but that's you putting your ideology on somebody. And I was learning that they were really happy. And I was putting that on them, that they couldn't be happy if they lived in poverty. I was like, man, I'm no better than the Spanish when I came through and marched with this thought that said, you have to convert, you're a heathen, right? So I learned at that moment to just really, you said it really beautifully about judging. Like, if I'm judging you, I'm judging me. I learned how not to. That was a big piece about it. And the second one was the way they lasted so long was really crystal clear communication. So every season for their area, people would come in just operating the seasons, just like the Mayan calendar and the pre-Gregorian calendars. That's like before we went to a 12-month calendar, right?
Because we were, what, 13 at that time? Or
Yeah.
Yeah, it was different.
It is. It all worked off the moon. It was perfect. It wasn't just weird and awkward, which is what we have now.
And you can feel it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So every quarter they would come in, and you know it was normally their spiritual leader would be speaking for the king, or you know whoever was in charge, and they would give really crystal clear instructions about what they were going through as a community, what people are expected to do, and you know people would bring in their and have like their whatever they grew and have shops, and then they would go back out into their villages. So everybody always knew what to do, and they operated through the seasons. And what I learned by that is we live in a world right now where every definition and everything that you could possibly say to do has an opposite. Hey, live your life like this. Hey, live your life like that. Hey, you're terrible if you have these thoughts. Hey, you're terrible if you have the opposite thoughts, right? And it's this really confusing place to live. And it starts with our media. It starts with our television, our news, our social media, which is happening right now, bans on TikTok, everything is shadow banned, and it's just so messy. But that's not how they operated. So a big driver for me was going, cool, well, how do we get back to a place where communities can speak without the fear of what they're saying? Yeah.
I love it. You know, I remember when you'd finally came back to Utah, right? And I'm talking to you in Park City, and you're like, I don't know. And you're not really, there's not really anything inside of you about really wanting to, from what I could tell, create abundance or money. You were just like, yeah, man, I'm waking up at 2 a.m, I'm meditating, and then I'm going back to sleep, and I'm meditating again. I'm doing all these things. I mean, you were like fully committed. And then you started building another app, which I thought was beautiful. And for those people that don't know, what was the name of that?
That original one was named One Mind. Doesn't exist anymore, but One Mind.
What I loved about it, though, is that it was this ability. It was a free app. It was a passion project that you created, where you could take people and bring them in and meditate in prayers. And it wasn't so that you could bring people in so you could create clients. You weren't trying to be what I call an LA shaman, meaning, you know, that's like, now I'm spiritual, now I know these things, now I dress this way, now you should listen to me. Right. And by the way, I'm all knowing and I should coach you and I can talk to angels or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
You've never been that guy, which I have to tell you how much I appreciate that.
Thanks.
Because it makes it accessible to people, right? Like,
Sure.
I don't think spirituality should be something that's not accessible to people. And so when I watched you do that, I was like, oh, my first thought was, oh, I think maybe they're just going to do it for this reason. But then I literally saw that you were just doing it to help people learn how to meditate and guide people and really create this place of love. And this is where things get interesting, because a lot of times we think that that when we give, you know what I mean, that eventually that we don't really need to make any money. You know,
Right.
like we don't really need to do that, and that, you know, being humble and meek and not having anything is spiritual,
Yep.
which is bizarre to me that we think this way, because how can we give what we don't have? How can we change the planet or impact things? I would rather you and I be billionaires, have access to all the people we need to on this earth, and find more billionaires that have the same heart and want to impact the world, than somebody that says, I have a bunch of money and I want to destroy the world. Don't know if they would do or don't, but I would much rather be in the place of having a seat at the table, as I call it, to be able to at least affect, shift, and change, right?
Yeah.
So when you created this app, what happens with it?
Well,
Because you shut it down.
Yeah, I was still in what I would call like the healer's dilemma. The person that says, hey, I want to give, but something inside of me is saying I shouldn't receive, right? And selfishly, the reason I built this is because I would go to these meditation retreats, I would go to these prayer circles, and I would come home and I felt alone. Like I wasn't connected to
understand
anybody
that.
in my own world.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh man, okay, so what if I build something that anybody could use? And, you know, at 2 a.m., if somebody wants to run a guided meditation out of Asia and everybody else wants to hop on the app and they can live stream through it, that they can. Or if, you know, grandma's so sick and you want to have a prayer, we created something called Lend a Prayer, where anybody on the application could hop in and, you know, lend their prayer to whatever was happening in somebody's family. And it was that was my selfish part. The other part of it was going, okay, I still don't understand how money feels to me, because I went through money and then I went, and my whole experience while I was gone was no money. It was like when I came back, I had nothing back. There's no revenues, you know, totally starting over at square zero.
All starting over.
All starting over.
Yep.
And this thought was just about how do we connect more people? And so I would travel, or I would call friends from all over the world. I say, hey, bring your community onto this platform. It's free. You know, there's no cost. You can use it. And they would 2 or 3 or 4 times. And then they'd disappear and would, you know, go off somewhere else. And I'm like, man.
So then you're just chasing things constantly, trying to build this community and trying to bring people in. And you're doing business, but I mean, that is what business can sometimes be, but you're not getting paid for it.
Yeah.
But you're still trying to keep the dream alive.
Yeah.
That is a dilemma.
It
You know
is.
what I mean? And then this dilemma of I'm spiritual, but yet I don't have anything at the moment. And also, I know I need to survive, and I got my kids I got to take care of, and I got my responsibilities, but I don't feel the value, or I don't feel value. I don't feel the value of money, or I don't feel valued to have money. What shifted in you though in that period of time where you said, you know what, I am valuable, and I do deserve to have abundance, and I do deserve to receive? Because many people in this world feel that exact same way before that point in time.
Yeah.
They think being spiritual, religious, whatever, you know, that you should do, like you don't have to have much.
Right.
But isn't it interesting that when someone at a church passes a collection plate, they ask for money. But yet at the same token, they say that money is like basically the tool of all evil.
Right.
Or the root of all evil.
Right.
Right? And it's like, no. This is just a tool. This is just an energy. And why is it that the person that at the pulpit is more deserving on how to utilize that dollar to make a change?
Is a really interesting question, because going through the process, you know, like you have and like others, where we're starting to shift what our belief system is around money, and we're starting to shift our belief system around what society is and this world, right? Because we were told that we have all these rules. I love that that part it's shown everywhere, from Neo in the Matrix, and Morpheus like red pill or blue pill.
One of my favorites.
I used to believe that there were only 2 options, and now after walking out of it, I was like, well, no, I don't need to take either one of those. You're telling me I only have 2 choices, and most people will take one or the other.
That's the trap.
But that's the trap.
That's the trap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, what does this mean? And I go through this process. It's my passion. I'm like, yes, we're going to crush it. Millions of users, and then I'll figure out how to make money on it. And all the while, in my opposite business, I say opposite because I'm just shelling out cash, and it's making no money. After it was done, I was putting to a spot where I'm like, I just can't physically do it anymore. There's not enough adoption. There's nobody else going to do this. I'm like, Source, I don't know what to do anymore. close it. And it took me about 6 months for this moment to happen where it was, you didn't design this for anyone else to make money, which is a key point. Where previous, I'm working on how do I make money. Then I build something that's not designed to make money, but it's designed to support people.
Yep.
And then it was, you hadn't designed it for somebody else to eat. So all the content creators, all the meditation retreat centers, all the prayer givers, whatever that concept was, it was never designed to help them financially. And so when they have to eat and make money, well, then you go use other tools or you create another event. And so it was a really beautiful moment where I was like, okay, great. The reason for One Mind in the beginning was because I would be part of something on like Facebook. And whenever you're holding a meditation or prayer, even a really spiritual like container, a live stream of some sort, and people are like opening and closing your container and they're dropping in words and they're like, what is this weird thing? And it just didn't feel well. So One Mind was created to make it feel well. I was like, man, if I ever build something again, it's going to be, not only can I create private containers for people, like safe places, but it will have to be designed for others to receive wealth. And then that also, I get wealth from that.
Of course. Yeah. It's that you get what you give. What is it? The law of reciprocity. Yes, thank you. I couldn't pronounce the word.
I'm with you.
It's like the tongue tie, but it is. That's how I see things, right? It's like, okay, how many people can I serve? And the biggest thing in this world right now, I've talked to you a little bit about the project we've been working on for the last 2 years, but the biggest thing in this world right now is heal people, right? But if we look at the hierarchy of needs, if we look at spiral dynamics, if we look at any of these things, people get stuck with the red pill, blue pill. The red pill, blue pill either leads to a job, going to college, or getting married, or, right? There's only a handful of options you have.
Right. Instead
of saying, oh, wait a minute. This is one of my favorite things one of my old teachers taught me, and that was, Dalton, who would you be without your story? And it's like, damn, this is just a story. Like, I do not have to choose to be the person I was yesterday. I have an opportunity because I woke up today to choose something different. But when people don't have the ability to be able to rise their financial income, right? Because that's what supports kind of this whole thing, at least here in the United States and other countries where you have, water and gas and food and, bills and a roof over your head. You have to have that. So when you had that aha moment of saying, okay, how do I serve people the most? Because when I get people what they want, then I'm going to get what I want as well. As a byproduct from being in service, I will serve people with so much love, so much care, so much stewardship that they're going to be happy on a monthly basis to pay me whatever that is, because they'll receive 10, 15, 20, 100 times fold.
100%. It was a moment where that had closed. I'm trying to figure this thing out. I have to eat. I'm trying to make money. And a friend called me and said, look, I have a problem. I have a coaching company. I do one-to-many. So he does one call, a lot of people on, kind of like a Zoom. And I have 1,000 people in a paid Facebook group. And this is around 2019. And Facebook kept banning him. Before banning became cool. He's kind of loud, kind of conservative guy. And he's like, so I have to log into from a fake account to fulfill, my coaching. And not only that, I have to sell it on a different landing page. Like, I sell my product over here. I have to get an email from them, go to Facebook and find them and friend them. And I don't know who's paying and who's not, because it's a lot of people to manage if you're managing any kind of a continuity program.
Oh, for sure.
And you're doing it by hand.
That's a lot. 1,000 people?
Yeah, that's crazy.
And then new people coming in, and then new people leaving, and then how do you delete them? And
what bill? Who didn't pay their bill this month?
Yeah, well, and also then too, if you think about, even 2019, but now look where we're at now.
Yeah.
Like, you say the wrong thing anywhere, you're canceled. Like, I can say the wrong thing right now, and people be like, oh, don't like that guy.
Yep.
Or, any of the social media networks, if they don't like what you're doing, if you're talking about health, if you're talking about politics, if you're talking about anything, if your music's not this way, like, it's an interesting place to have so much lack of the ability to be able to say what you want to say. Someone told me a long time ago, this country is about freedom of speech, but not freedom of reach. And so the platforms don't have to allow you to have reach, which I thought, okay, that makes sense, unless I'm the person that's already created the reach and those people want to listen and talk with me or about whatever subject that thing might be. That is up, as long as I'm not breaking the law, right?
Sure.
That should be up to anybody. But all of these social platforms, you can't.
Right.
Like, you can't do that. You can't, like, I don't have anything I want to say that way personally,
Sure.
but there are plenty of people that do.
Sure.
And there are plenty of people that all of a sudden wake up the next morning and their Facebook is off, their YouTube channels are cut. When we started our company, we were showing just a website on Kratom, right? We were talking about the benefits of Kratom, where it came from. I woke up one morning, Google had shut me off.
Yeah.
Facebook and also YouTube had canceled our accounts.
Mm.
You work all this time to be able to build this community, to build these people.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, over one night, it's gone.
Yep.
Because you don't control any of that platform.
Right.
So you might think you do because, you brought them into your, basically into your community.
Right.
But that community, you wake up the next morning and you'd be like, wait a minute, where's my community?
Yeah.
And then they can't find you.
It's gone because you don't own the emails. You don't own any credit cards. You don't even own the data, the content that you're posting up on those platforms. And there's a lot of good reasons to have them. But his problem was, well, I have a business and it can't operate that way. Can you help? And my original answer was, no, I can't. It's too big for one company. So I put that engineering hat back on, and from a couple other conversations we had, all of a sudden this ting hit me and said, oh, I can build a platform where somebody else, let's say a meditator, was like, hey, I want to take up what One Mind was. I want a community of meditators where it's my name, my logos, my URLs, my merchant processing. I own the data and the credit card information if they're charging it. And I can have something that operates a little bit like a social media network, a little bit like a learning management system that has, live streaming and direct messaging platforms. It's all the communications, but in my world. And I own and protect all of that. So I said, you know what? I can help. I can build something that can run your coaching company, but I can also build something that helps the doctor, because one of the problems that you have is, let's say you're a stem cell doctor. You can't talk about that anywhere.
No, nowhere.
But it's not that information isn't coming from the FDA, or it's not. So doctors are like, I can't even talk to my patients. We're like, great. So I can build a platform that's designed for you to make money with your clients, and it's your world, and it's protected, because all of our technology is meant so that shadow banning can't happen and censorship can't happen, as long as you're not breaking laws and doing like crazy things. But it's your people. You invite them into your world, and then it's your narrative and your control. So that set off about a 3-year stint where I took all of the information that I learned from making money in the previous business back in the day.
Right.
Then I took the cleanliness and the capabilities of what One Mind was meant to do, and then wrapped kind of the social media components and learning management components and just miniaturized it for companies.
I want to stop you right there. So when you're building this, 3 years is a long time, right? It's a long time.
Yeah.
It's not, because it goes by quickly. I mean, I've been building for 2 years, and I'm like, man, one day we'll launch. I think we're almost there. We're going to get, no, we're not there yet. Oh, okay, back to the drawing board. Like, so when you're going through that process, because one of the things that we do as visionaries and business owners, that is, we solve problems, right? But now you have this connection that you have fortified by being in Mexico and doing this work and meditating. How do you take that connection of source, God, energy, whatever you want to call this, that voice, and bring it into your business so that you're still in alignment with what you're building, and also making sure that you don't go back to the old self and you're still using that intuition, that knowledge to guide you, but making sure that the place you're hearing from is a clean place and not a place of going like, well, if I do this one thing, because you always have an option, right?
Sure.
Like in social media, you've got an option. Do I want to make this thing more addictive? Because if I do, I'm going to have a lot more people. Or do I want to provide something of such value that it's automatically addictive?
You said it a while ago. You asked a question about, or made a statement about running employees, like your first go around.
Mm-hmm.
And in that world back then, I remember multiple times literally laying under my desk because it felt like I had ulcers. Like the stress was so much, my body was like rejecting it. Like I was in pain. And I would go to the hospital and I'm like, I must have ulcers. And they're like, you don't. I'm like, I think I'm dying half the time. And I didn't want anybody to know. And I look at that now because of my meditation practice, because of my fitness practice, because of the understanding understanding of life, like things get really tough. They're hard. But I also know that it's not life ending. Before, if money was low, the stress would just eat me. I just think about it all night. But now I sleep really well because I learned over that time to have a clear practice. Like, here's how I operate. Here's how my body functions. Here's the system that it operates in. So I'm going to lead into that, which helps remove some of those stresses, which helps remove those components. I also, I just really direct. I don't have a ton of friends I hang out with. It's just those that I do, I don't have to hang out with on a daily basis. We have good connections, but I'm also not going to the clubs because I think I'm, alone or whatever that is. And so everything in my environment is designed to help me stay in that really clean place. And again, things get tough and it's stressful and employees and payroll and you didn't quite hit that launch date and it just rolls and rolls. And like in this company, like I think it's like 36 months I haven't paid myself. That also means that I get to do other things in order to survive and stay focused. And the only way that I can do that is through my meditation practices, through my channel practices, through my connection to source and God, and like settling in every moment when I wake up. I literally do a dream journal while I'm sleeping. I wake up, I make voice notes of what's happening in the dreams. I come back, I wake up in the morning, I set a meditation, I go over whatever my notes were, any of those crazy thoughts. I'm just like, how could that be used today? And I'll just continue to work through that process.
Do you still set an alarm to wake up?
I don't set an alarm to wake up anymore, but I wake up way earlier than I used to.
Yeah, just so that you guys know, when I talked to Greg about this practice, you were telling me, and I don't remember the exact time, but you'd go to sleep. You had like 2 alarms, I think, that went off in the night.
Yeah.
Remember this? You'd wake up, and then you would say whatever you had went through, and then you would go back to sleep. When you're doing that, you're breaking up your like circadian rhythms. Yeah. Do you find that messes you up throughout the day and your energy and your sleep levels? And
I love it. I love to challenge things.
I know you do.
So that one in particular, I'm learning how to consciously astral travel or having dreams where I could actually wake up and know what those were. Right. And that practice was that I set an alarm every hour on the hour. Would wake up, take a note, go back to sleep. And for me, anything that I can do for a short amount of time, maybe not forever, like my longest juice fast was 90 days. Anything that I can do to break a pattern kind of feels like it shakes loose something and I'm able to come out with it with a new response, a new decision.
Right.
So I loved it. Now when I wake up, like I'll wake myself up after out of a dream, make a note, and then put back in, but it's not
go back to
required
sleep
anymore.
What is this is something that occurred to me as I was just listening to you. What is the most important question you ask yourself when you're building these things? Like, what is the one thing? What's that one question that if people were building something and in the same seat that you're in to stay in integrity, to stay in the direction that they're going, what's that one question?
And that's going to be like a business, so I can relate it. It's like a business related question.
Yeah, that's helping you through this creation process.
Yeah, it's actually really super clear on my why. It's what does it do? Who does it serve? Why does that matter to me? And if I can understand that at like a base level, because we kind of talked about this, like I try to think from the ground up, from the lowest. If I'm going to build a house, I'm going to build the foundation first before I put the walls on, or I'm going to tear it apart, right? And so a lot of it is that why, like what impact am I hoping that this makes? And being just radically committed to that. The reason that I brought up, like I haven't paid myself for a long time on this company, and eventually it will be sitting on the same side of the table, someplace in Dubai, both with a couple bills in the bag, and can literally change the world at that point.
Yep.
Everything up until then is helping me get to that point. But in the midst of it, most people lose heart because they just weren't committed to that why. So be really like radically committed, not just about the money.
Thank you.
It's about the impact.
Thank you for that. It's so refreshing to hear that from somebody else, because all I can say what I've done with Kratom for the last 10 years, there was a massive why behind it. And that was to better people's lives in many ways. But now the why behind what I'm building now is a different why. It's the same thing in a way, but I can tell you, and I know, and you know this, and the reason I say this is so important is because 90% of businesses fail.
Mhm.
And I think there's a couple reasons for that. Obviously, someone's just starting off, they don't know what they're doing, but I do really feel like it's probably lack of focus, but the lack of the why from the focus, because this is one of the biggest processes that someone can go through from a personal development perspective as running a company, right?
Yeah.
People looking up to you, you've got staff members, you're responsible for a lot of people's livelihoods, you're responsible for their families. The buck ends with you, nobody else. As you said when you went with the FTC, I know I got there. I put that on there.
Yeah.
The buck ends with you. And so now you've been doing this now for 3 years. You've raised capital. You've got, I think you said something, 300 or 400 people on your platform right now.
Yeah.
So people are listening. It's working. What are you building? Like, what is this thing that you've been able to channel through Source, been able to put together, and that you're putting your life energy into?
Yeah, the company's name is Jedari. That's Jedari. It means Jedi level technology wrapped in the elegance of Armani. Thank you, LSD, 5 years ago for channeling that word.
I love that so much. When you told me that today, I was like, I'd heard the name and I saw the hat and all of it, right? And I was like, that's pretty cool, man. I love it. But then today when you told me that, there was just something that just like, man, it was fantastic.
Yeah, the platform, if I gave you the elevator pitch, it's community behind paywall.
Okay.
And that's digital community behind the paywall. So it basically means we built a platform for any type of content creator, and a content creator could be a family that wants to have a safe place where they can post all their pictures and they can live stream together, or it might be a company or a brand that wants to do things in social media world. That's free marketing. But they also want to have a place where they own the content, they own the rights to the information, they own the credit cards. And it's basically a communications channel designed to be opposite of what we have in the rest of the world. And that means that people can control their own narrative, they control their own conversations. We have television stations currently that run off of the platform because they were getting demonetized on the others. They were saying, we don't like your message, so we're going to turn your capability of making money off. So we said, great. Why don't you bring all of your people, your communities, right? Your 1,000, 10,000 people that pay and watch your show every day. Now do it in your own world so they can have their own conversations. So it's more than just like a television station. It's a place where you can have all this, sub-content, like different groups of conversations and different locations. And it was really meant to be a place where we could take everything that was cool about the digital space and give it to a company, or an organization and say, great, you now control your own destiny.
Which I love. The other thing too, we were having coffee before we had this conversation, right? Yeah. We went and grabbed some coffee and you said something to me and I thought, man, Greg, brilliant, brother. We're standing in line and he's telling me about like basically going through the version 2. And as he's telling me about this, he said, there's a big problem in the world, right? Yep. And you tell me that, when a lot of people go onto a platform all at once, so think about someone turning onto a TV station, because what your platform does, which I really find impressive, is if I was to go live and I had a large community in front of me, they're going to get notifications immediately. Yep. And if they're buying my content, they're obviously going to want to listen, right? Because how many times do you get an email that says, oh, we're going live, or you don't know because the whole world is so busy, but the way you're able to push those notifications and all the different platforms you're working on, from iPhone to Androids and all those things.
Yep.
But it does that. But what's cool about what you've done is you've made it so you can have 2,000 people come in. Was it every minute?
It's per second.
Oh, per second. Excuse me.
Yeah. What you brought up was a great question. I'd like to wrap that with one really cool distinction, that if it's your people and you're going live, it means only your people see that. You're not mixed with any other communities. They're not going to Patreon or Facebook, and then they're going to your place. This is all your people. So you're right. And what happens in like a web environment when you're building something that scales, you go to Amazon and you're like, cool, I want to get one of these Elastic servers, and that sounds really cool. And that goes over other people's heads already, but you're going, okay, cool. I need to build something that will grow. And if you were to go live and you have a few thousand people in your community, or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, and they all want to be a part of your experience, you crash most systems.
On Zoom, it's going to crash all that. Now, this is the brilliant part. It wasn't the fact that you built this thing. Like, it's cool. I love that.
Yeah.
The brilliant part is the question you asked yourself. And you didn't look at it from a perspective of like, okay, you know, why doesn't Zoom work? Why doesn't this thing work? You looked and you thought, what are some of the largest platforms on the planet that are doing these things? And then how do I do that? You reverse engineered and you thought, okay, it's the true power I think that we have in this world is by the questions we ask, as of what does this clothing remind me of, or who does it remind me of, or, you know, where is this I need to go into the world, or what inside of my body is hurting and what emotion is that creating, and is that mine or is that theirs? Like, you just have this ability to be able to ask really poignant questions from a tactile perspective, and then having the bravery and the humility to dive deep into that. And I think that's really what separates you as an entrepreneur.
If you just said something, I'd love to like pin it for just the whole planet that listens to this. The better you get at asking questions, the better answers you get. And that's from us, from businesses, from family. Like, being a good listener is an important skill for people. Being able to ask questions, like you've been asking me questions to kind of massage out the storyline and massage out what's important for the listeners, right? To give them some real good value. That capability, most people have forgotten how to do. And so in this scenario, we're like, man, this is a problem. And, you know, for really large companies, say you're Zoom and you want to put 1 million people on a live stream, you have to give them plenty of notice. It's not something that you can just turn on. And so we just looked at it and said, great, who else does it? And it happened to be the New York Stock Exchange. When they turn on, when that bell rings, the whole planet goes crazy. And so we just built off the same technology to solve that. But it came from learning how to ask really good questions, not just what's wrong. So, okay, great.
I love it. So speaking of questions, what does spiritual capitalism mean to you?
Spiritual capitalism to me means the capability of staying in my truth and building two ways, building solutions that solve problems and monetizing it. Like, if we went back to this question, I look at what I can do now with the amount of money I have in the bank. The reason that at some point we'll sell Jedari, well, because somebody can operate it well or better than I can, right? They have bigger resources. I'm the driving force of that. What I'm really excited about is what I can do with 1 billion behind me. And so our drive, not only clean communications, not only support people and have people be able to feed their families, it's also, in order to make really, really big changes, I get to have a lot of money behind me. And the same with you. And if we have 50 of us that all have a lot of money behind us,
You got it.
like, there's this conversation that you need to, $20, $30 million to win a senator seat in the US. And what would happen if 50 of us went in at the same time? We're like, hey, let's just go buy this.
You know, like right now, I was just in Scottsdale and I was down there listening to RFK and he was speaking, and they were talking about how much money that the two candidates between Trump and Biden, we're talking billions of dollars to be able to get a seat at the table as the president.
Right.
That doesn't mean they're the right person for the job. It just means they have enough money and they have enough way to be able to showcase who they are. They have enough power behind them. And so it takes more people rising up together, creating financial abundance together, and saying, okay, what do we want to see change, and asking the good questions, but not from a perspective of I'm a career politician, right?
Yeah.
But what does the people that I grew up with, what is the community that I'm around, what is how do we solve addiction? How do we help the health pandemic? Like, how do we do these things? But it's only through those questions, but we also have to have the ability to be able to put our money where our mouth is, which I think is the greatest thing with having any type of abundance in life, is that when you make a decision and an idea, you can follow through with it.
Yeah.
Now, you might follow it through to off a cliff. That's possible. But it's that whole concept, you got to stand for something or fall for everything, right? So, Greg, the last question I'm going to leave you with is this, and that is, what do you want to be remembered for?
I want to be remembered for the way that I love. And I pour that into everything that I do, from my businesses to my family to communications to this kind of a thing. To me, it literally is all about how much love can I flow in. And yeah, I would stop it there, because people are going to dissect it any other way that they want to, from architecture to whatever else. But in reality, like I wake up, I meditate, I fill the heart with love, and I lead forward. And spiritual capitalism to me is like leading business with love.
Yeah. 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 I couldn't have said it better. I mean, it is everything always goes back to love. We're either looking for love, we're chasing love, or we're doing things because we think that we can get more love. But then once we recognize, oh, wait a minute, I don't need any of this. Like actually the biggest thing you as a business owner is a stewardship of bringing forth this new platform that you're bringing to the world. That is a declaration, and that is an energy exchange of love.
Right.
And that's so beautiful. So if people want to find out more about you, like first and foremost, follow Greg on social media. He gets on, he does a ton of lives. He's always speaking from his truth and his heart, and he's sharing his meditations, and he's just constantly pouring into people because you do love so much.
Yeah. It's Greg W. Anderson on all the social platforms. Greg W. There's a lot of Greg Andersons in the world.
Sure.
That's a very best part. You can also find gregwanderson.com. You can find a little bit more about the journey, the story, communications, contact, for whatever.
Yeah, but people want to find your platform because there's people here that are listening and saying, hey, you know what?
Yeah.
I don't want to use Facebook.
Yep.
All these other things. I want to own my content. I want to own my media. I want my people to be able to find me. I want a safe community to where I can either talk about health, I can talk about politics, I can talk about whatever I want to talk about.
Yep.
And I need a place to do that to where this is my community. Where do they do that at?
Jedari.com, JEDARI.com.
Awesome, man.
Yeah.
Well, Greg, thank you so much for coming out. I'm super honored to share this story with you and to share this experience. And here's to the two of us, making billions so that we can change billions of lives, man.
100%. I
All right,
appreciate
brother.
it. Thank you.
Much love.